And thank you so much for your patience. My name is Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of nonprofit Utopia. We're the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders. All this month of July, we've been focusing on federal grants and federal funding. And today we're going to focus on strategies for writing winning federal grant proposals. All right, a little bit about nonprofit Utopia. As I indicated, we're the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders. We have a private group where our members can innovate in a safe space, share lessons learned and ideas. And our mission is to train the next generation of ethical nonprofit leaders. And our vision is to strengthen the nonprofit sector by training up to 50,000 people between now and 2033. If you want to learn more, you can go to nonprofitutopia.mn.co. Alrighty, a little bit about myself. I am an expert in community and organizational development. I have over 30 years of experience in the industry. I have worked with a number of nonprofits to help them to realize their goals through capacity building, grant writing, and all of that good stuff. I have provided technical assistance and or written grants totaling over $100 million over my career. I also host live streams like this and a nonprofit Utopia podcast, and I'm on staff at UIC in their Certificate in Nonprofit Management program, as well as with Roosevelt University teaching social enterprise. So as you can see, we have covered quite a bit over the month, focusing on federal grants. And you can see past videos. Go to our YouTube channel. That's the Nonprofit Utopia YouTube channel. We started off with showing you how you can assess whether or not you're ready to apply for federal grants. And then we talked about the federal grant funding life cycle. And then we showed you how to navigate Grants.gov. And then we showed you how to create a workspace on Grants.gov. And then yesterday we took a small break and we talked about tax credits as a form of COVID relief. And today we're going to be focusing on strategies. This is not necessarily a proposal writing workshop, but we will be focusing on strategies for increasing your chances of getting funded. We realize that there are no guarantees. It's an extremely competitive process, but the strategies we share with you today are strategies that have been proven to work in my experience, and other grant writers will tell you that they work as well. So right now I'm going to ask you to post your name in the chat. Let us know where you're from. Let us know any questions that you might have with writing federal grants. Let us know any problems you might have. Let us know your experience, any tips that you'd like to share. As you know, that there's a whole lot more to being a winner in writing the grant proposal than meets the eye. It's not just a matter of responding to questions and telling a good story, although those are very, very important components. However, there's a game of strategy, and plus there's limited funds, right? I mean, you could literally get a 98 out of 100 score and still not get funding. It's just that competitive, right? But again, not to be daunted, you just continue and you keep going until you get it right, okay? All right, so we're going to show you how to optimize your chances of securing federal grant funding, and we're going to also help you to understand how you can align your mission with the federal agency's mission. We're going to show you how to demonstrate a need for the service and help you understand what federal funders are looking for and how to respond strategically to questions asked on the federal grant applications. All right, so one thing that I have found to be very, very helpful in my own experience and also in working with others who are successful with the federal grants program, you need to have your own project in mind and fleshed out. All too often, what I see from inexperienced grant seekers is every time they see a proposal, they go and kind of respond to it and they adjust their own program to fit into what the federal government is looking for, or even what some other funder is looking for. And as a result, they may or may not, it's always a crapshoot anyway, but I can guarantee you that's an even riskier way to go about it. You should have your own ideas in mind and stay as focused as you can on your own mission and vision, and not deviate from that by looking for money. I can tell you, I've been in a situation in my own life, running a nonprofit, chasing federal dollars, and then trying to make sure that we were responsive and deliver what the grantor wanted. And then we got to a point where we risked um, forgetting why we started the program in the first place, who we were there to serve in the first place. So you have to make sure that you know who you are, know the community, know what the community needs, know your mission and your vision, and you can help solidify your concept by doing a program logic model, which basically shows you how to respond to the needs of the community, and knowing what activities you should engage in, help you to develop goals and objectives and outcomes and all of that, and even how you're going to evaluate it. And then after you do your logic model, it's also helpful to do a flow chart, to actually draw out how your operations are going to flow. And when I say how your operations are going to flow, you want to look at a sequence of activities or experiences that your clients are going to have from start to finish. So how do you get clients in the door? What happens to the client once they get in the door? Do you do an application process? Is there some assessment process? And then what happens after they're assessed? What happens when they go through the program? What happens when they're done? How do you actually evaluate it? So if you can just take step by step what happens from start to finish and do that in chart form, and then after that, once you have your logic model, once you have your flow chart, you develop a boilerplate proposal. And all you have to do really at that time, for the most part, is look at your logic model, look at your flow chart, describe what's happening, and then, you're more than halfway there. You're about 75% of the way there. And you would do these things regardless of whether or not the federal agency that you're seeking funds from is actually asking for them. All right. And then, two, you have to remember that project management is critical. In fact, project management is just as important, and in some cases, might be a little bit more important than the actual writing itself. And when I say that, in some cases, it might be more important, is because there, 9 times out of 10, when you find out about the announcement, you might have 10 days to respond. And good project managers are really good at assessing the situation, figuring out who needs to be involved on the team, who needs to be doing what, when, and where, right? So if you don't have that part down, chances of finishing successfully are probably slim, right? So you want to make sure you assemble a team of stakeholders who can help you round out your team and really make a well-rounded response. So those are people who are in your fundraising department, people who actually work on the program, people who are in your finance department. All of these people have different perspectives, different expertise, and can help you create a very well-rounded proposal. You want to make sure too that you always have certain documents on hand in one place. So at the end of the process, you're not running around trying to find these things. These could be things like your letter of determination from the IRS, a certificate of good standing from your state to let federal government know that you have in fact filed all the reports, a list of your board members and their contact information, et cetera, et cetera. Different agencies will require different things, but these are, pretty good examples of what's frequently required. And then you want to make sure that you're searching for grant opportunities, again, that are in alignment with your program rather than taking a shotgun approach. All money is not good money, as I've learned from experience. And you will probably learn that too if you don't know it already. So you go to Grants.gov and you want to look for past RFPs to get a sense for what has been asked of similar agencies for similar programs in the past, current RFPs. So you might want to download those to consider whether or not you're eligible and whether or not you have the time and capacity to actually apply. And then you also want to look at projected RFPs. That way you know what could be coming down the pipe within the next 3 to 12 months, right? What the agency is planning to do. And then that way you can start positioning yourself and your organization to respond accordingly. You also want to read proposals that have already been funded. Some agencies make their past grants public already on their website. In other cases, you have to do a FOIA request. That's a Freedom of Information request. You can also search USA.gov and then USAspending.gov to give you a sense for how much money and what types of activities different government agencies have spent their money on. And that will really help you to be strategic. You can also identify what other funding, what other programs in your community have been funded, right? So you can respond appropriately to needs assessment. You can write a more informed community needs assessment to see what's being done already and seeing what needs are still unmet, even though someone else is addressing needs in your community. And I find too that a really good way to be a better grant writer is to be a grant reviewer. There's a saying that says you learn by teaching. And that is very, very true. You also learn to be a better grant writer by actually reviewing proposals that other people have written, participating on these panels of discussions to hear what a panel of your peers might be thinking, listening to some of the questions that they might have, listen to some of the flaws that they may find, and also, looking at some of the really good proposals that actually come through. And then two, we're taking it for granted. You need to learn how to navigate Grants.gov before applying. And this is really, really important. I guess in some cases you're forced to learn as you go, but ideally you want to know how to do that before you're in a time crunch, right? The worst feeling in the world is to learn how to do something when you're under the gun, right? So you want to complete your registrations. You want to review the resources that Grants.gov has on their website. There are a number of videos, a number of trainings that you can take. There's a blog, so there's really no excuse, so to speak, for your not learning this, because all the information that you need is there. And you can even call the agency contact person if you have questions about, the RFP, some of the questions that are written, understanding what they meant by certain questions, understanding if you can substitute some documentation for another, and basically, just getting a really good feel for, what's required, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And then you want to make sure you keep your agency contacts current. And when I talk about internal um, agency contacts, I'm talking about your contacts that you have listed on the Grants.gov portal. There's going to be a primary contact for the agency, and then there'll be other contacts, such as, a person from the finance departments, such as someone who might be a program person, someone who's a fundraiser or a grant writer. You want to make sure all of that stuff is current, because you don't want to be in a position where you got 12 hours to submit and then you find out that you forgot to indicate that someone was someone who was a contact person is no longer with the firm, and then you have to find someone to be that contact. All right, so all of that stuff should not be a worry when you're under the gun. All right, and you want to identify a point person who is responsible for coordinating and or submitting applications. So everybody who has access to grant.gov does not necessarily have permission to submit, right? So you want to make sure that there's at least one person amongst those contacts who actually has the permission to submit applications on your behalf, right? And then just for activities in general, right? Not necessarily just with the grants.gov system. For project management purposes, you need a leader, right? You need a point person who's going to coordinate all the resources, all the data collection, all the information collection, coordinate who the team members are in the meetings and all of that stuff. That person's going to make assignments of each person, and you need to be the one to go through the proposal, and I realize those RFPs can be over 50 pages, but somebody needs to go through it first, right? And identify who is, what people are needed, uh, what data are needed, what information is needed. You need to know when it's needed and by whom. And if you're the one who is coordinating all of this stuff and you're writing, I think it's really, really important that you make the assignments first and then do your part. Because if you do your part and you find yourself, knocking up against the deadline, the day of, you know, people may or may not have the information that you need. And you know how this saying goes, poor planning on our part doesn't constitute an emergency on the part of the person that we need to get the information from. All right. And again, letters of support, you need to get those up front. Even if they're not required, it's good to have a letter of support, because if they're not required for the federal process, it's good to document, for the community that, leaders in the community are supporting your efforts. If you're going to go and secure a loan or other funding from other sources, it's good to document that you have community support. All right, so you want to make things as easy as possible for people that you're getting a letter from, and you want to draft a boilerplate letter, right? Ask them to put the letter on their letterhead. And when I say boilerplate, this is a form. You want to fill out as much information as possible, but you also want to leave blanks so that they can fill in blanks. You want them to be able to tailor it to this specific proposal. So you want to have them give background information about their organization, right? You want to also have them share history of them working together with your organization. Talk about what you've achieved together and really highlight those projects that are very similar to the project that you're trying to get funding for, because you want to establish not only do you have a track record of doing this type of work, but you also have a track record of working collaboratively with members of the community to make a more powerful impact. You want them to also indicate, that they support the project. And, the problem with many letters is they just stop there. They say that we support this project. You don't want people to say just that they support the project. You want people to indicate if there's a role for them. If they're a partner, you want them to indicate that they're a partner. If they're not necessarily a partner, if they're willing to make referrals, right? What resources are they willing to provide, right? And what activities will they engage in to make sure that they're doing their part to help you to succeed? And if the funding announcement requires letters from specific types of agencies or specific language, make sure that language is in the letter. And if there are certain agencies, for example, if you're in workforce development, you have to go to your local government funded workforce development agency to get a letter of support from them. All right, and you also want to negotiate a strong MOU or memorandum of understanding or collaborative agreement. A collaborative agreement is even stronger. A memorandum of understanding is not legally binding, but when people can see a framework in writing that has roles and responsibilities and all that good stuff, it makes it a little bit easier for people to conceptualize how they're going to work together, but it also helps people to hold one another accountable, right? A collaborative agreement is more legally binding, right? So there are a number of ways that you can go about in developing an MOU. I've seen that MOUs have, generally speaking, been too general. For members of Nonprofit Utopia, I do have a detailed outline of what should go into an MOU, and it goes beyond this list, but this is a really good list as well. But you should always, talk about what the project is, the mission, vision, goals, and objectives, the roles and responsibilities of each partner, who those partners are, the organizations, the specific outcomes that you're trying to achieve, and when we talk about outcomes, what's going to change as a result of your working together on this project, the deliverables, what is each partner and what is the collaborative together? What are you going to provide? Are the deliverables some sort of report? Are the deliverables some sort of meeting facilitation? What exactly is that service? What is that product that you are committed to provide? What are the accountability measures, right? Do you have obviously you have the goals and objectives, but do you have data that support um, that let you know whether or not you are actually meeting those goals and objectives? And if you're not, what are you doing to pivot, right? What are the financial considerations that people are willing to provide? Is each partner willing to put up some money, or is it an in-kind service? And then when we look at the benchmarks, you have to identify what those benchmarks are, and those are going to vary depending on what it is you're trying to achieve. For example, people in housing might have a different set of performance benchmarks than people in social services or youth development. And again, talk about the data collection methods. Who's going to collect the data, right? How are you going to track those outcomes? What mechanisms are you going to put in place? What methods are you going to use? That could be through surveys, that could be through different forms, registration forms, etc. And then how are you going to evaluate, whether or not this is a successful project? And we'll talk more about evaluation. And I know this is obvious, but people really don't read as carefully as they should. And it's really, really important, especially with these government grants. There's so much detail up front that you need to be aware of. Again, a NOFA or notice of funding announcement, funding availability, that can be, over 50 pages just in and of itself, right? Not to mention all these different forms. All right. So you want to read the questions carefully. And not only read the questions, but read the background information, because in many instances, you'll find that the government has done a really good job of developing a program framework for you. They have done a good job of identifying what their goals and objectives are. And what you need to do is tweak your model and make sure that you're in alignment. But again, you don't want to be going after those opportunities that are so different from what you're doing that you actually are guilty of mission creep, right? And then when you look at the questions that you're responding to, there's going to be a set of questions that you respond to for what they're going to call the program narrative. And, each agency is doing this differently, but in many instances, they might have two questions within one question, five questions within one question. You want to make sure that you answer each one of those sub questions separately to make sure that you're being fully responsive to what they're asking. The temptation is to look at all those questions and then try to answer them all in one fell swoop, and you can easily miss something. And remember, it takes a score in many instances, 98 and above, right? You want to make sure that you are giving complete responses. And then once you look at those questions in the program narrative section, go to the back, right? And look at how you're going to be evaluated, right? And if you're pressed for time and you have to have a choice between answering the questions on the front and answering the questions that are within those scoring criteria, I would start with the scoring criteria, make sure that I have responded to those things that I'm being scored on, because when you're a reviewer, they give you very specific instructions as to how to grade, right? And those scoring criteria that you see in the NOFA are the same criteria that they give the reviewer. So they're going to be looking at those scoring criteria even more so than the questions, the way you respond to the question on the front, right? And then you also want to have, if you have time, have an objective person who's not part of the process, somebody who's not actually doing the work, somebody who's not doing the writing. Have them read your responses and score it using that same scoring criteria, and then give you feedback, and then you go back and do it. If you don't have that person, then you look at your responses with fresh eyes and you try to score it yourself. Again, you're going to have very, very limited time, so it's very important to be organized and strategic as you write. Make sure the budget section tells the same story as the program narrative. In many instances, I'm not one of them, but many reviewers and folks from agencies who look at these proposals, they go to the budget first, right? And then they read the program narrative. So you want to make sure that whatever activities you have in your program narrative, they're accounted for financially. That means if you're having a workshop to address one of your goals and desired outcomes, you want to make sure that you have enough money in the budget for a workshop presenter, for the materials, for any equipment that you might need. Does that make sense? All right. So every activity in the narrative needs to be accounted for. Every person that is named in your program narrative needs to be accounted for in the budget. And make sure that the attachments are all completed and uploaded. And in fact, it's smart to actually make sure that you have your attachments done very early on in the process, right? So you're not, with 10 minutes to go trying to find where those forms are, right? So there'll be standard forms, and whoever the agency is that you're applying to, they'll let you know what forms that they want you to complete. They'll also let you know what attachments, in addition to those SF forms, that they want you to complete. So required attachments could include things like an MOU. It could include things like a logic model. They don't always ask for a logic model, but it could include things like that. And it's important to know that you have to, if nothing else, make sure that your application is complete. And a complete application has everything in the checklist that they're going to give you. And if there's anything left out, there is a strong, strong, strong possibility that your application won't even be reviewed. It will be automatically disqualified. So, there's a person, from staff who's looking just to make sure that these applications meet, all the criteria that are, in the application format, right? Even stuff like making sure that you have things double spaced when they ask you to double space it. And sometimes people do a single space. So people will look at stuff like that. And if you're not in conformance or conformity with what they're asking for, your application could literally not go to the next level where it's scored. And be careful of perfectionism. Remember, perfectionism is an enemy of the good. I am a perfectionist to the core, and I struggle with that. You got to make sure that you are responsive, but in many instances, there's not time to be perfect, right? It makes no sense to miss a deadline and have a perfectly written application and nobody can score it because you missed the deadline. So now we're going to talk about some of the common sections of proposals. And remember, every agency is different. Every proposal within those agencies are different. So you're going to have to make sure that you read very, very carefully. The worst thing you can do is take information from one proposal and just copy it and paste without really paying attention to what they're asking you in each proposal. All right, so some common sections include things like the needs assessment, goals, objectives, outcomes, methods, evaluation, and budget. They don't always ask for these things. In some cases, they may ask you a totally different set of questions. So, with the needs assessment, you want to make sure that you understand what's going on in the community. You want to describe what's going on in the community, talk about some of the issues. And this is not the area where you give your solution. Your solution is going to be in your method section. So at this point, you just want to talk about what's going on in the community. What are some of the problems? What are some of the issues? You want to be able to back it up with stories, back it up with data. Talk about what could happen in the event that the problem is allowed to fester. And then you can really, really set yourself apart by indicating not only is there a need for the service, but if you provide it, that there's a demand. And when I say you, I'm talking about generally speaking. Again, your solution is going to be in your method section, but you want to make sure that there is not only a need, but there is a demand. That means people realize that there's a problem and they want to take part in some solution that will help them. The goals are basically saying, given what's going on in the community, what some of the issues are, what some of the problems are, what do we want to achieve? All right, broad stroke, what is it that we want to do? And the goals are the what you want to do, right? And if the NOFA indicates certain goals, you want to take the goals that they have and adopt those as your own, right? And then you may or may not want to add some more to them, right? But at any rate, you want to make sure that whatever their goals are, they're in alignment with your organization's mission, goals, and objectives, and they're also in alignment with the goals and objectives of your own program. Otherwise, you will find yourself in a trick bag if you were lucky enough to get the money and you're spending most of your time doing stuff that's not consistent with your own agency's goals and objectives. And the objectives are basically the how. How are you going to achieve your goals, right? They should be SMART, meaning they should be specific, they should be measurable, they should be achievable. And achievable is going to be different for different organizations, and it's going to be achievable within the capacity of the team that you have assembled. They should be reasonable and they should be timely, so you want to give a deadline, right? And then methods. This is where you have your time to shine, right? So remember, you identified in the needs assessment that there were some issues going on, there are some problems, right? And in the methods, this is where you say, hey, we've got the solution, and this is how we're going to solve the problem. We're going to talk about the activities in which you'll engage and the timelines, right? When you're going to engage in those activities. And all of these need to line up with your goals and objectives, right? So your methods are going to basically tell how you're going to reach your goals, your objectives, and even your outcomes. And you make sure that your goals build on the needs assessment, the objectives build on the goals, and then the methods build on the objectives. And really, somewhere within here is goals, objectives, and then really outcomes, right? And then the methods come after that. And the outcomes basically say, what's going to change as a result of our programs, right? Of our activities. And when we say what's going to change, not what's going to change for you, the organization, but what's going to change for the community, what's going to change for your client. The only time you talk about what's going to change for you, the organization, is when you're applying for capacity building dollars. And you want to make sure, again, that, you know, one builds on the other, and you want to develop a timeline with tasks. What are the activities? When are these activities going to be accomplished? And who's going to be responsible for making it happen. And that could be a person or it could be an organization, depending on whether or not this is for one agency or for several agencies. And I know this seems obvious, but it's not always obvious. You want to make sure that you follow the guidelines that are presented in the NOFA. So you want to pay attention to things like, if they request a font size of 12 point, or if they tell you what type of font they want, make sure you do that. If there are page limits, make sure you adhere to the page limit, because they're not going to read anything beyond. If they tell you 12 pages, they're not going to read after page 12. All right. And so that'll all be work in vain. And then evaluation. I know this is one of the problem sections. You want to communicate how you know you're successful, right? So you want to go back and look at the goals and objectives and the outcomes that you identified in the narrative, right? And then within the context of the discussion of the goals and objectives and outcomes, indicate what success looks like. You want to talk about the data that's going to be collected, when, how, and by whom. And then you're going to describe what you expect to see. If in fact your solution is working, what's the evidence? What do you expect to see in your clients? What do you expect to see in the community if what you're doing is working, right? Then you want to show or describe how the learnings that you get from this process are going to inform future um, programming, right? If you find out that there's something wrong, within the first, 3 to 6 months, you'll have time to correct it, and you might want to indicate that, right? And then you might want to talk about how you'll evaluate again after a year, and then show how you're going to use your findings. You want to indicate whether or not you'll have someone from your board looking at this, someone internally in, say, operations, looking to assess what's going on, or whether or not you're going to have an outside evaluator. And then you want to describe your evaluation plan and your budget. You might not want to have a line item budget, but you might want to indicate, you know, the activities and how much it'll cost. All of that is going to depend on how much room they give you in terms of characters to respond. All right, so that is, in a nutshell, an overview of how you can be strategic in responding to a federal grant application. You will be able to find this recording on YouTube, and you should know we've got one more coming up. That will be July 30th. So that's this Friday. We're going to talk about what you do once you get the grant. And regardless of whether or not you get the federal grant, I think these workshops are very helpful. They'll help you to respond to other funding opportunities. If you can be responsive to a federal proposal, I think responding to a foundation or a city grant would be a little, I wouldn't say a piece of cake, but it'll be a little bit easier. All right. And I had these in the wrong order, so please forgive me. So your budget should be a numeric presentation of the program narrative. So whatever you write in your program narrative, so if you talk about people, you talk about your activities, you talk about your goals and objectives, all of that stuff should be reflected in your budget. Again, the activities could be things like a workshop, it could be a special event, it could be a set of activities, a set of different sessions, right? Counseling sessions, whatever those activities are, you need to know how much money it's going to take to staff them, how much money it's going to take to actually deliver them. If you need a space that you have to rent and all that good stuff, all of that again needs to be in your budget. And you have to have a budget narrative in addition to a budget. And the budget narrative is describing, it has all of the line items, but you're writing sentences to talk about, why this is needed. It's going to talk about the calculations, for that line item. It'll justify how you got that number. And two, I know it should be obvious, but make sure that the numbers are accurate and don't include fillers like miscellaneous and contingency. Okay, so that completes our overview. And I do apologize that those slides were a little bit out of order, the last two. But before I answer any of your questions, I just want to share with you a few upcoming opportunities. Starting August 15th, we're going to have a master class in how to start a nonprofit in 90 days. And that will be a class that you can take at your own pace. It'll have a combination of video instruction. It'll have checklists that you need to stay on track, checklist of all the forms that you need at the state level, the federal level, in order to actually create your organization. You'll have worksheets that will help you flesh out your ideas. You'll have a chance to chat with me. You'll also have downloadable workbooks and downloadable forms and instructions. So the downloadable workbooks are things that I developed to help you actually conceptualize what your organization is going to look like. And then the actual downloadable forms are going to be the actual forms that you need from the state and the federal government. We also have the Nonprofit Founders Challenge, and that is coaching for those who want someone to kind of go with them, hold their hand through the process. And again, we're going to help you get through everything that you need within 90 days. So within 3 months, the only thing you're doing is waiting to hear from the federal government as to whether or not you got your tax exempt status. And I can tell you, every client that I've ever worked with has been successful. I've not had a client that did not get their tax exempt status. And then coming up September 10th, we've got Capacity Building Blocks, which is a 6-month intensive where we go through leadership development and show you every process that you need to know as a nonprofit leader so that you can not only develop your own leadership skills, but also develop the capacity of your own organization. And by the time you're done with this, not only will you have stronger leadership skills, and you'll also have a leadership plan and a roadmap as to how you can make your organization be more sustainable and have a greater impact. So if there are any questions regarding this live stream, you can email me at ValerieFLeonard@nonprofitutopia.com. But while I'm here live, you can chat, post your questions in chat. And if you're a member of the Nonprofit Utopia community, we can also continue this discussion in the Nonprofit Utopia community. I also have, for the Nonprofit Utopia members, I have samples that you can look at. And I also have other materials that you can use to assess your capacity and to help you strengthen your proposals. All right. So again, you can join Nonprofit Utopia at nonprofitutopia.mn.co. All right. So I am going to look here. Thank you, Kim. Kim, if you're still there, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you for attending. And Gregory Cox, good morning. Thank you so much for stopping through. All right. So if there are no further questions, I am going to end this now. I just want to say thank you, and thank you again. All right. Again, this recording will be up on YouTube. Take care. Bye-bye.